What happens when a man who commands the world from his glass tower is brought to his knees by a secret from his past? Damian Sterling, a name whispered with fear and respect in every boardroom, thought he had buried his heart 6 years ago when his wife walked out. He replaced love with logic, warmth with wealth, but some ghosts don't stay buried. Today, the ghost of his past walked back into his life, not alone, but with two small children in tow, children with his own piercing gray eyes, and they carry a secret far more devastating than their existence. The air in the 80th floor boardroom of Sterling Innovations was as cold and sterile as the view of the sprawling city below. Damian Sterling sat at the head of a monolithic obsidian table, his presence sucking the very oxygen from the room. His suit, a custom piece by Tom Ford, was the color of charcoal, sharp and unforgiving as the man himself. His gaze, a pair of chilling gray eyes, swept over the nervous executives, and a single dismissive flick of his fingers was enough to end a career. "The projections from the European division are not just disappointing," he said, his voice a low, controlled baritone that carried more threat than a shout ever could. "They are an insult to the name on this building. Mr. Henderson, you have until the end of the quarter to rectify this, or you will be rectifying your resume. Understood?" A portly man named Robert Henderson visibly paled, nodding his head so vigorously it seemed a separate entity from his body. "Yes, Mr. Sterling. Crystal clear, sir." Damian didn't acknowledge the reply. He was already moving on, his mind a relentless supercomputer processing data, vulnerabilities, and opportunities for conquest. This was his kingdom, built on the ashes of his failed marriage 6 years ago. When Amelia had left, she had taken the color from his world, so he had rebuilt it in black, white, in the cold, hard gleam of profit. He had everything a man could desire: a company that shaped global markets, a portfolio that could rival a small nation's GDP, and a fiancée, Isabella Monet, whose beauty was as curated and flawless as the modern art decorating his penthouse. Yet in the quiet moments after the sycophants and subordinates had gone, an unnerving silence echoed in the vast, empty spaces of his life. His intercom buzzed, a soft, deferential chime. It was Clara, his executive assistant for the past decade, a woman whose loyalty was as unshakable as her efficiency. "Mr. Sterling, my apologies for the interruption. There is a woman here to see you. She's insistent." Damian's brow furrowed. "I have no appointments. Send her away." There was a pause. "Sir, she used the name Rosewood. She said to tell you Amelia Rosewood is here." The name hit Damian like a physical blow. Amelia, a name he hadn't allowed to be spoken in his presence for 6 years. A name that belonged to a vibrant, laughing artist who smelled of turpentine and wildflowers. A woman who had once been the sole axis of his world. He had erased her from his life with the same brutal efficiency he applied to a failing subsidiary. Yet here she was, a ghost resurrected. "Send her up," he commanded, his voice tight. A tremor of something unfamiliar, dread perhaps, or a dangerous flicker of hope, ran through him. The executives, sensing a seismic shift in their boss's mood, quickly gathered their papers and scurried out of the boardroom. Damian walked out onto the adjoining private terrace, the wind whipping at his suit. He needed a moment to fortify the walls he had so carefully constructed around his heart. What could she possibly want? Money? He had sent her a divorce settlement so vast it should have insulated her from reality for 100 lifetimes. She had sent it back, untouched, with a single cryptic note. "I only ever wanted you, not your gilded cage." The private elevator doors slid open with a whisper. He turned, his expression carefully neutral, a mask of indifference he had perfected. And then he saw her. Amelia Rosewood looked different, yet achingly the same. The wild auburn curls he had loved to run his fingers through were tamed into a simple ponytail. The paint-splattered jeans and bohemian blouses were gone, replaced by practical, well-worn clothes that spoke of a life far removed from this world of luxury. But her eyes, those expressive, emerald green eyes that could see right through his defenses, were unchanged. And she was not alone. Standing on either side of her, clutching her hands, were two small children, a boy and a girl. They couldn't have been more than 5 years old. The girl had Amelia's fiery hair and curious green eyes, but the boy was his mirror. He stood stoic and observant, with the same dark, straight hair and, most unnervingly, the same intense, storm-gray eyes that stared back at Damien from his own reflection every morning. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken history and impossible questions. Damien's mind, usually so quick and decisive, went utterly blank. He could orchestrate a hostile takeover of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, but he had no protocol for this. "Amelia," he finally managed to say, the name feeling foreign on his tongue. "What is this?" Her chin lifted, a gesture of defiance he remembered well. "It's been a long time, Damien." "6 years," he stated, the words clipped and cold. He gestured vaguely toward the children, his hand trembling slightly. "Who are they?" Amelia's gaze softened for a moment as she looked down at the children, her hands tightening around theirs. She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for an impact, and then met his gaze again. Her next words shattered the sterile peace of his world and cracked the very foundation of his carefully constructed life. "They're ours, Damien," she said, her voice clear and steady despite the tremor he could see in her hands. "This is Luna, and this is Leo. They're your children." The words hung in the air, audacious and impossible. Your children. For a moment, Damien Sterling felt the floor drop out from beneath him. The city skyline outside his panoramic window seemed to tilt on its axis. His first instinct was a cold, coiling rage. A trick. It had to be a trick. A desperate, transparent ploy for money. "That's not possible," he said, his voice dangerously low. He took a step forward, his towering frame casting a shadow over her. "You're lying. This is some kind of extortion scheme, isn't it?" Amelia flinched as if he had struck her, but she held her ground. The little boy, Leo, moved slightly to stand in front of his mother, a miniature protector against the storm he could feel brewing. The gesture was so instinctual, so him, that it sent a sharp, painful jolt through Damien's chest. "I'm not lying," Amelia insisted, her voice trembling with emotion she fought to control. "I found out I was pregnant a month after I left. I tried to tell you, Damien. I called. I sent emails. I even wrote letters to your mother, but I never got a response. It was like you had all vanished." "I blocked your number," he admitted, the words tasting like acid. "I instructed my staff that you were not to be allowed any contact. I wanted a clean break." "A clean break," she echoed, a bitter, incredulous laugh escaping her lips. "There was nothing clean about it. You were erasing me, and I was carrying your children. I was alone, scared, and you were building higher walls around your fortress." He stared at the children, his mind racing to find a logical flaw in her story. The timeline fit. The boy's resemblance was uncanny, a chilling genetic echo. The girl, Luna, had Amelia's artistic spirit written all over her. She was already looking around the vast office with wide, curious eyes, seemingly fascinated by the sculptures. "I want a paternity test," he declared. The words were a shield, a way to reassert control, to turn this messy, emotional cataclysm into a manageable clinical procedure. Amelia nodded, her shoulders slumping slightly in what looked like exhaustion rather than defeat. "Fine. I expected as much from you. Anything you can't quantify in a lab or see on a balance sheet doesn't exist, does it?" Before Damien could retort, the elevator doors chimed again. Isabella Monet swept into the office, a vision in a stark white Chanel dress, her blonde hair coiffed to perfection. She was the perfect accessory for his life, beautiful, ambitious, and utterly uncomplicated. "Darling, I was just confirming the arrangements for the gala," she began, her voice a smooth, cultured purr. Then she stopped dead, her eyes landing on Amelia and the children. Her perfectly painted smile tightened, and a look of pure venom flickered in her eyes before being masked by polite confusion. "Damien, who is this?" Damien felt a muscle jump in his jaw. "Isabella, this is an old acquaintance, Amelia Rosewood." Isabella's eyes raked over Amelia's simple clothes with disdain. "Rosewood, the artist. I thought you'd moved to Oregon or somewhere equally rustic." Her gaze then fell upon the children, lingering on Leo's gray eyes. Her face hardened. "And who are these?" "They're my children," Amelia said, her voice regaining its strength. Isabella let out a delicate, mocking laugh. "Your children? How sweet. What are they doing here? This is an office, not a daycare." She turned to Damien, placing a possessive hand on his arm. "Darling, you must have security handle this. This woman is clearly delusional and looking for a payout." "That's enough, Isabella," Damien said, his voice sharper than he intended. He gently removed her hand from his arm. The sight of Isabella's casual cruelty directed at Amelia stirred something protective in him he thought had long since died. He turned to Clara, who had been hovering discreetly by the door. "Clara, book Ms. Rosewood and her children into the presidential suite at the Sterling Grand. See to it they have everything they need. Food, clothes, toys, everything. Bill it to my personal account." He then looked at Amelia, his expression unreadable. "You will stay there until the results of the test are in. My lawyers will be in touch to arrange the details. Until then, do not attempt to contact me directly." It was a dismissal, a business transaction. He was handling this crisis the only way he knew how, with money and delegation. Amelia's eyes welled with tears, but she blinked them back furiously. "Of course, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Whatever the CEO decrees." She took her children's hands and allowed Clara to lead them away. As they walked towards the elevator, Luna turned back and gave a small, hesitant wave. Damien found himself, for a reason he couldn't fathom, raising his hand to wave back before catching himself and letting it drop to his side. The doors closed, leaving him alone with Isabella. "Damien, what on earth was that?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "You can't possibly believe her. She's a grifter, a nobody from your past trying to cash in. Children with your eyes? It's the oldest trick in the book." "I will handle it," he said, his voice flat. "Handle it? You should have had security throw her out on the street, and putting them up in the presidential suite? You're rewarding her for this stunt," she fumed. "You need to get your lawyers to crush her, make her disappear again." Damien turned to face her, and for the first time, he saw a crack in her perfect facade. He saw the cold, calculating greed in her eyes. It was a look he saw in boardrooms every day. It was a look he often saw in his own mirror, but seeing it directed at the mother of the children who might be his, it felt repulsive. "I told you, Isabella," he repeated, his voice dropping to a glacial calm. "I will handle it." He walked away from her, back to the window overlooking his city, his empire. But he wasn't seeing the buildings or the bustling streets below. He was seeing a little boy with his own gray eyes standing defiantly to protect his mother. And for the first time in 6 years, Damien Sterling felt the unnerving sensation of losing control. The 3 days it took to get the results of the expedited DNA test were the longest of Damien's life. He moved through his routine with mechanical precision, board meetings, market analyses, tense dinners with Isabella, but his mind was elsewhere. It was in a suite at the Sterling Grand, replaying the image of 2 small faces. He found himself scrolling through the hotel's security feed on his tablet, a gross invasion of privacy he justified as due diligence. He watched them in the suite's living room. He saw Amelia patiently teaching Luna how to draw a horse, her hands moving with a familiar grace. He saw Leo sitting in a corner, meticulously building a complex tower out of blocks, his focus absolute. The boy's concentration was so intense it was unnerving. It was his own. Isabella was a constant, buzzing presence in his ear. "My father's legal team can have her buried in litigation for years," she'd say. "We need to issue a press release denying these baseless claims before they leak." She spoke of the situation as a hostile takeover of his personal life, and for the first time, her cutthroat pragmatism grated on him. On the 3rd afternoon, his private line rang. It was Dr. Alistair Finch from the genetics lab. "Damien," the doctor said, his tone professional, "the results are in. I can send the encrypted file over, but I thought you'd prefer to hear it from me directly." "Just tell me, Alistair," Damien said, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of his desk. "It's a 999% match, Damien. There's no ambiguity. The boy, Leo, and the girl, Luna, they are yours. Congratulations. You're a father." The word, father, landed in the silent office with the force of a detonation. "Congratulations." The word felt absurd. He was a father. He had been a father for 5 years and had never known it. The anger he expected to feel was absent, replaced by a profound, hollowing emptiness. He had lost 5 years, 5 birthdays, 5 Christmases, the first steps, the first words, all gone. He hung up the phone and sat in silence for a full 10 minutes. Then he stood, shrugged on his jacket, and walked out of the office, leaving a bewildered Clara and a string of unanswered calls in his wake. He didn't take his usual chauffeured car. He drove himself, his fingers tight on the steering wheel of his Aston Martin, and headed for the hotel. He bypassed the front desk, using his owner's keycard to take the private elevator directly to the presidential suite. He found Amelia on the balcony, sketching the sunset in a charcoal pad. The children were asleep inside, tucked into the large beds in one of the spare rooms. She didn't seem surprised to see him. "There you're," he said. It wasn't a question. She just nodded, not looking up from her pad. "I know." He walked to the railing, standing beside her. The wind was cool, a welcome sensation against his heated skin. "Why now, Amelia? After all this time? If you needed money, you know my lawyers would have." "This isn't about money," she snapped, finally looking at him, her green eyes blazing with a fire he hadn't seen since their last terrible fight. "Do you really think so little of me? Do you think I would hide your children from you for 5 years, only to show up with my hand out? Then why?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Why come back now and drop this bomb into my life?" Her face crumpled. The anger drained away, replaced by a raw, naked anguish that stunned him. Tears streamed down her cheeks, silent and heartbreaking. She sank into one of the balcony chairs, her body trembling. "Because I have no other choice," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It's Leo." Damien's heart seized. "Leo? What's wrong with him? Is he sick?" She took a shuddering breath, trying to compose herself. "He's been tired for a while, bruising easily. We thought it was just being a kid, but he kept getting worse. 3 months ago, he collapsed at the park. We rushed him to the hospital." She looked up at him, her eyes pleading, as if begging him to understand the weight of what she was about to say. "Damien, he has aplastic anemia. It's a rare blood disorder. His bone marrow, it's failing. It's stopped making new blood cells. The doctors say it's severe. He needs weekly blood transfusions just to stay stable." The clinical terms washed over Damien, cold and terrifying. He felt a wave of dizziness. His son was sick. "What's the cure?" he asked, his mind immediately shifting into problem-solving mode. He could hire the best doctors, build a hospital if he had to. "There is no pill, no simple treatment," she said, her voice heavy with the burden of countless sleepless nights and doctors' consultations. "His only chance is a bone marrow transplant." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, chilling and absolute. "They tested me and Luna," Amelia continued, her voice barely a whisper. "Luna is too young. I'm only a partial match. It's too risky. The chances of rejection are high. They said the best possible donor would be a full biological sibling or a parent. His father." She looked at him, her tears flowing freely now. "I didn't come back to ruin your life, Damien. I came back to save our sons." The revelation was a physical blow. All his theories of extortion and manipulation evaporated, leaving behind a horrifying, unquantifiable truth. This wasn't a corporate negotiation. It wasn't about the past or their broken marriage. It was about a little boy sleeping in the next room, a boy whose life depended entirely on him. Damien stared out at the city, at the thousands of glittering lights that represented his power, his influence, his wealth. And in that moment, none of it mattered. The entire Sterling Empire felt like a pile of worthless dust compared to the desperate plea in the eyes of the woman he had once loved, begging him to save the life of the son he never knew he had. "I'll do it," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'll get tested tomorrow, whatever it takes." The agreement to get tested shifted the dynamic from a confrontation to a fragile, unspoken truce. Damien threw the full weight of his resources into the situation. He had Leo's medical files transferred to the world-renowned hematology department at Johns Hopkins, consulting via video conference with the top specialists in the country. He moved Amelia and the twins from the impersonal hotel suite to one of the fully staffed guest houses on his sprawling estate, arguing it was better for privacy and for the children's comfort. Amelia agreed, albeit reluctantly. She was wary of being pulled back into his orbit, of becoming ensnared in the gilded cage she had fought so hard to escape. But for Leo's sake, she would endure anything. Damien found himself drawn to the guest house at odd hours. He'd leave a contentious board meeting, and instead of heading to his sterile mansion, would walk across the manicured lawns to the stone cottage. He wouldn't always go in. Sometimes he'd just stand in the twilight, watching through the large windows as Amelia read a bedtime story to the twins, their small heads nestled against her. The scene was so painfully domestic, so full of a warmth his own home lacked, that it felt like watching a life he was supposed to have lived. When he did go inside, the interactions were stilted but poignant. He learned that Luna was a budding artist like her mother, her drawings of colorful, misshapen animals now taped to the guest house's expensive refrigerator. He discovered that Leo was fascinated by astronomy, and Damien found himself ordering a state-of-the-art telescope, a knee-jerk, extravagant purchase that felt both inadequate and necessary. One evening, he sat with Leo for an hour, the boy silently showing him a book about constellations, while Damien pointed out Orion and Cassiopeia, his voice softer than he'd heard it in years. These moments were a stark contrast to his life with Isabella. She was consumed with planning their annual Sterling Foundation Gala, a lavish affair that was the highlight of the city's social calendar. The florists are recommending white orchids, but I think Casablanca lilies are far more dramatic, don't you? She asked one evening, scrolling through images on her tablet as they sat in his cavernous living room. Fine. Lilies are fine, Damien said, his attention on a medical report he was reading about pediatric bone marrow transplants. Damien, are you even listening? She snapped, her patience wearing thin. This gala is in 3 weeks. We're announcing our engagement. Your ex-wife and her situation will not overshadow this. I've already had to kill 3 separate stories from tabloid reporters who got a tip about her being in town. Thank you for handling that, he said, not looking up. Handling it is my specialty, she said, a strange edge to her voice. I just want to be sure you're handling her. Once this medical business is over, you need to send her on her way, Damien. A generous trust fund for the children, supervised visitation. We can't have her permanently attached to our lives. He finally looked up, his gray eyes cold. They are my children, Isabella, not a situation or medical business. They will be a permanent part of my life. The finality in his tone silenced her. She stared at him, a flicker of genuine fear in her eyes. She was losing her grip, and she knew it. Meanwhile, another figure from the past re-entered the picture. Damien's mother, Catherine Sterling, was a formidable woman, a matriarch from an old money family who valued legacy and love over profit margins. She had never approved of Isabella, whom she called a beautifully polished acquisition. She had, however, adored Amelia. When she heard through the ever-active family grapevine that Amelia was back, she descended on the estate without warning. Catherine bypassed Damien's mansion entirely and went straight to the guest house. Amelia opened the door to find her former mother-in-law standing there, her eyes filled with a storm of emotions. Is it true? Catherine asked, her voice thick with unshed tears. Amelia could only nod. Catherine swept her into a fierce embrace, and then she saw them. Luna peeking out from behind her mother's legs, and Leo sitting quietly on the sofa. Catherine's perfectly composed face broke. She knelt, tears tracing paths through her makeup, and held her arms out. "Oh, my darlings," she whispered. "My grandchildren." She spent the entire day with them, her joy tinged with a deep, simmering anger at her son. "He told me you left and never looked back," Catherine said to Amelia in a quiet moment, as they watched the twins play on the lawn. "He said you wanted nothing to do with his family. That stubborn, proud fool. He let his hurt blind him." Catherine's presence was a comfort to Amelia and a complication for Isabella, who saw her as a powerful ally for the opposing side. Feeling increasingly threatened, Isabella did what she did best. She weaponized information. She hired a discreet but ruthless private investigator, a man named Gavin, who specialized in digging up the kind of dirt that could ruin lives. "I want to know everything about her last 6 years. Isabella instructed him in a hushed meeting at a private club. Where she lived, who she dated, and most importantly, where her money came from. A single mother with 2 children doesn't just survive, she had to have help. Find out who helped her. 2 days later, Gavin delivered a thin manila folder. It was mostly innocuous. Records of part-time jobs, apartment leases in a small Oregon town. But one document stood out. A bank statement from 6 years ago showing a single wire transfer into Amelia's newly opened account for $500,000. It wasn't the amount that was shocking, but the source. The transfer originated from a Cayman Islands holding company, a company that Gavin's research had definitively linked to one man, Sebastian Croft. Sebastian Croft was Damian Sterling's most hated rival, a man whose business ethics were as corrupt as his personal life. The two men had been locked in a bitter corporate war for years. Isabella stared at the document, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across her face. It was perfect, better than she could have ever imagined. This wasn't just dirt, it was a dagger, and she knew exactly where to aim it. The results of Damian's compatibility test were due any minute. He was pacing his office, the same office where Amelia had reappeared and turned his world inside out, when Isabella entered without knocking. She held a file in her hand, and her expression was a mixture of feigned sympathy and predatory glee. "Damian, darling, we need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her. "I was worried. About you, about this whole situation. I felt you weren't seeing things clearly, so I took the liberty of doing some research for your own protection." Damian stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. "What did you do, Isabella?" She placed the manila folder on his obsidian desk. "I just wanted to understand why she really came back. It turns out her story has a few missing chapters." She slid the bank statement across the desk. "Look at the source of this transfer. It was deposited into her account the week after she left you." Damian picked up the paper. He saw the amount, the date, and the name of the holding company. A cold fury, familiar and terrifying, began to build in his chest. He recognized the Shell Corporation instantly. It was one of Sebastian Croft's preferred vehicles for illicit payments and bribes. The implications were ugly and immediate. The timing was perfect. 6 years ago, Sterling Innovations and Croft Enterprises had been in a brutal bidding war for a crucial tech patent. Damian had won, but it had been a near thing. Croft had been furious. "She was paid off," Isabella said, her voice dripping with poison. "Croft paid her to leave you, to destabilize you at the most critical moment of that negotiation. Her leaving, the emotional turmoil, it almost cost you everything. It was corporate espionage, Damian, and she was the weapon." Every piece seemed to fit into a neat, ugly picture. Amelia's sudden departure, her refusal of his settlement money, she wouldn't need it if Croft had already paid her. Her 6 years of silence, it was all a lie, a calculated mercenary act of betrayal. The fragile trust he had started to build with her, the tentative steps toward a new understanding, all of it crumbled into dust. The image of her tear-streaked face as she told him about Leo's illness now seemed like a masterclass in manipulation. His phone rang. It was Dr. Finch. Damian snatched it up. "You're a perfect match, Damian," the doctor said, his voice bright with optimism. "A 1 in a million match. We can schedule the procedure as soon as you're ready. This is the best possible news for your son." The best possible news. It felt like the cruelest irony. He was the key to his son's survival, a son brought back to him by the woman who had sold him out to his greatest enemy. He hung up without a word and stormed out of the office. Isabella watched him go, a triumphant smirk on her lips. He found Amelia in the guest house's garden, tending to a small patch of lavender. The twins were napping inside. He didn't bother with pleasantries. He threw the bank statement down on the stone bench beside her. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice shaking with restrained rage. Amelia looked at the paper, her face draining of all color. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a horror he misinterpreted as guilt. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. "My fiancé is more thorough than I am, it seems," he spat. "Was it worth it, Amelia? Was $500,000 the price for our marriage? For my trust? Did you enjoy working for Sebastian Croft?" "You don't understand," she pleaded, standing up, her hands outstretched. Oh, I understand perfectly, he roared, finally losing control. You played me. You took money from my worst enemy to leave me, to wound me when I was most vulnerable. And now you come back, crying crocodile tears about our son, using his illness to what? Squeeze more money out of me? What's your next move? A tell-all book? A press conference with Croft by your side? Each word was a lash, and Amelia flinched under the assault. Tears streamed down her face, but this time they were tears of pure fury. How dare you? She screamed back, her voice raw. How dare you believe that of me? After everything we were to each other, you think I could be bought? You think my love for you was something I could sell? The evidence is right there, he yelled, pointing a trembling finger at the paper. You see evidence, Damien, but you don't see the truth, she cried, her body racked with sobs. You want to know the truth? You want to know why I left and why I took that monster's money? Fine, you'll have it. She took a deep, shuddering breath, her eyes locking onto his with a searing intensity. Sebastian Croft didn't pay me to leave you. He threatened me. He came to my art studio a week before I left. He showed me photos, Damien. Photos of you with another woman. Isabella, as it turns out. But that wasn't the threat. He told me he knew my every move, that he had people watching us. He showed me a file full of fabricated evidence of insider trading, documents that would have sent you to prison and destroyed this company. He told me that if I didn't disappear from your life, he would release it. He said he would ruin you, and if that didn't work, he had other, more permanent ways of removing you as a competitor. Damien stood frozen, the blood draining from his face. The money, Amelia continued, her voice breaking. The money wasn't a payoff. It was his sick way of sealing the deal. He said it was non-negotiable. He said it would be my severance and would make it look like a transaction. So if I ever tried to come back, you would see this exact piece of paper and believe exactly what you're believing right now. He told me if I ever tried to contact you, to warn you, to even send so much as an email, he would activate his plan. He would destroy you. So I left. I left to protect you. I sacrificed everything, our entire life together, to keep you safe. And I kept that secret, carrying that burden alone for 6 years, to protect you from the man who would have killed you to get what he wanted. The garden fell silent, the only sound the ragged gasps of Amelia's breathing. The truth, when it finally came, was not a whisper, but a nuclear blast, obliterating his anger, his certainty, and his entire understanding of the past. She hadn't left him. She had saved him. Her departure wasn't an act of betrayal. It was the ultimate act of love and sacrifice. And he, in his arrogance and pain, had been blind to it for 6 long years. The revelation hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. Damien felt as if the world had been ripped out from under him, replaced by a new, horrifying reality. For 6 years, he had fueled his ambition with the pain of her betrayal. He had built his empire on a foundation of bitterness, telling himself her leaving was proof that love was a liability. Now he knew the truth. The entire empire existed because she had sacrificed her own happiness for his safety. The woman he had resented was the very reason he still had anything at all. His gaze shifted from Amelia's tear-streaked, defiant face to the pristine mansion in the distance. He saw Isabella, not as his fiancée, but as a viper he had welcomed into his life. He finally understood the meaning behind her smug look, the hidden edge in her voice when she'd said, "Handling it is my specialty." She hadn't just found the information. She had twisted it, knowing it would be the perfect weapon to destroy Amelia in his eyes. He also realized with chilling certainty that Isabella had likely been Croft's informant inside his life 6 years ago. She had been playing the long game all along. "Stay here," he said to Amelia, his voice a low, dangerous rumble he barely recognized as his own. He turned and walked, not back to his office, but towards the main house. Every step was deliberate, fueled by a cold, precise rage that was far more terrifying than his earlier outburst. He found Isabella in the Grand Library on the phone with the caterer for the gala, laughing about some trivial detail. She looked up as he entered, her smile bright. "Darling, you'll never believe what—" "It's over, Isabella," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. Her smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" Did you speak to her? I told you she would have some sob story. I know what you did, he interrupted, his gray eyes like chips of ice. I know you've been feeding information to Sebastian Croft for years. I know you were his pawn in driving Amelia away. And I know that you brought me that file today not to protect me, but to try and drive the final nail into the coffin of a woman you saw as a threat to your position. Isabella's face went white. That's insane. She's lying, poisoning you against me. No, Damien said, taking a step closer. For the first time in 6 years, everything is perfectly clear. You have 1 hour to pack a bag and vacate my property. Your belongings will be sent to you. The engagement is off. The gala is canceled. Your access to all my accounts and properties has already been revoked. If you attempt to contact me, my family, or Amelia ever again, I will release evidence of your corporate espionage to the authorities. I assure you my evidence is far more compelling than a single bank statement. Tears of rage and humiliation streamed down Isabella's face. You can't do this. After everything I've done for you. You have done nothing for me. You have only ever done things for yourself, he said, his tone final. Your hour starts now. He turned his back on her and walked out, leaving her sputtering in the ruins of her ambitions. His focus narrowed to 2 critical objectives. The first was his son. He called Dr. Finch immediately. Schedule the transplant. Whatever you need, whenever you need it. Clear the hospital wing. Fly in any specialist you want. Money is not an object. Just save my son. The second objective was Sebastian Croft. For the next 48 hours, Damien Sterling unleashed the full terrifying power of his intellect and resources, not for profit, but for vengeance. He didn't sleep. He barely ate. He locked himself in his corporate war room, a secure chamber deep within Sterling Tower, and brought in his most loyal and ruthless team of forensic accountants, lawyers, and cybersecurity experts. It was no longer business. It was a crusade. He called it the Sterling Doctrine, total and complete annihilation. He didn't attack Croft's companies. He dismantled them from the inside out. He used his vast financial leverage to trigger margin calls on Croft's loans. He poached his top executives with irresistible offers. His hackers, the best in the world, uncovered years of illegal offshore accounts, bribery schemes, and racketeering, the very crimes Croft had planned to frame him with. He compiled a dossier of evidence so damning, so irrefutable, that it would not only bankrupt Croft but also send him to a federal prison for the rest of his life. 2 days after his confrontation with Amelia, as he was preparing to check into the hospital for the pre-transplant procedures, he made one final call. Sebastian Croft answered, his voice arrogant and smug. Sterling, to what do I owe the pleasure? I know what you did to Amelia, Damien said, his voice a whisper of steel. I know you threatened her. I know you threatened me. Croft laughed. The little artist finally sang. It took her long enough, but it's her word against mine, Damien. You have no proof. Oh, I have proof, Sebastian, Damien replied calmly. Check the morning news, and I'd advise you to retain a very good criminal lawyer. You're going to need one. He hung up. At that exact moment, a comprehensive, encrypted data package from Sterling Innovations was delivered simultaneously to the desks of the Attorney General, the SEC, the IRS, and the top editors at the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. By noon, Croft Enterprises stock was in free fall. By 3 o'clock, federal agents were raiding its headquarters. By nightfall, Sebastian Croft was taken into custody, his face a mask of disbelief as he was led away in handcuffs, the flash of cameras documenting his downfall. Damien watched it on the news from his private hospital room, a deep sense of grim satisfaction settling over him. The battle was over. Now, the more important fight, the one for his son's life, was about to begin. Amelia was in the room with him, and for the first time in years, she reached out and took his hand. Their fingers interlaced, a silent acknowledgement of the war he had just won for them, and the one they were about to face together. The day of the bone marrow transplant was heavy with a mixture of clinical sterility and profound human emotion. Damien and Leo were in adjacent rooms in the hospital's specialized pediatric wing, a space Damien had insisted on renovating and funding in the week leading up to the procedure. Amelia paced the hallway between their rooms, a sentinel watching over the two most important men in her life. Catherine Sterling was there too, a pillar of quiet strength, holding Amelia's hand when the anxiety became too much to bear. Damien was awake for his procedure, the harvesting of the stem cells from his hip bone. It was painful, a deep, aching discomfort, but he welcomed it. Every throb of pain felt like an act of penance, a small price to pay for 5 years of ignorance and lost time. As he lay there, he thought not of his company or his stock prices, but of a little boy's quiet fascination with the stars and a little girl's bright, messy drawings. The hours that followed, as Leo received the transplant, the slow, life-giving drip of his father's cells into his own small body, were the most agonizing of their lives. They sat together in the waiting room, Damien, Amelia, and Catherine, not as a fractured group, but as a family. They barely spoke, but the silence was filled with a shared, desperate hope. In that quiet space, they began to heal their own wounds. Damien and Amelia talked, really talked, for the first time. He apologized, not with the grand, empty gestures of a billionaire, but with the simple, raw honesty of a man stripped of his arrogance. "I am so sorry, Amelia," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "for my pride, for my blindness, for not fighting for you, for not being the man you deserved." "We were both young and lost, Damien," she replied, her own eyes filled with tears. "I ran because I didn't know how to fight what I was up against. I should have trusted you. I should have believed in our strength." The weeks that followed the transplant were critical. Leo had to be kept in a sterile isolation room as his body, now stripped of its own immune system, began the slow, arduous process of accepting the new cells and building a new one. Damien never left the hospital. He had a cot moved into Leo's room, working from a laptop and managing his global empire from a small corner while his son slept. He was there for every blood test, every doctor's update, every moment of fear and flicker of hope. He and Amelia became a team. They read to Leo through the glass, played games over an intercom, and celebrated every small victory, a rise in his white blood cell count, a day without a fever. Luna came to visit, pressing her painted hands against the glass partition, telling her brother stories of the squirrels in the garden to make him smile. During this intense, suspended period, Damien Sterling was irrevocably changed. The ruthless corporate raider was replaced by a devoted father. He found more satisfaction in coaxing a weak smile from his son than in closing a $10 billion deal. Finally, after a month that felt like a lifetime, the doctors delivered the news they had all been praying for. The transplant was a success. The engraftment was complete. Leo's body was producing new, healthy blood cells. He was in remission. The day Leo was finally released from the hospital was bright and clear. Damien watched as Amelia hugged their son, her face buried in his hair, weeping with a relief so profound it was palpable. He knelt and wrapped his arms around both of them, pulling Luna into the embrace until they were a tight, inseparable circle of four. Life after the hospital was a quiet, deliberate reconstruction. Damien, the man who hadn't taken a vacation in a decade, took a 3-month leave of absence, delegating the running of his company to a trusted board. He didn't want to miss another moment. He spent his days not in a boardroom, but on the floor, building elaborate Lego castles with Leo. He discovered the simple joy of pushing Luna on a swing, her delighted laughter the best return on investment he had ever known. He and Amelia didn't rush to redefine their relationship. The labels of husband and wife were from a different lifetime. Instead, they focused on being mom and dad, rediscovering each other through their shared love for their children. The love that had been buried under years of pain and misunderstanding began to bloom again, nurtured by shared laughter and quiet, late-night conversations after the kids were asleep. One evening, months later, the four of them were in the backyard of the main house. No longer Damien's cold mansion, but their warm, messy home. They were using the powerful telescope he had bought, and Leo was showing Amelia how to find Jupiter. Damien stood back, watching the scene. Amelia leaned over the telescope, her auburn hair glowing in the twilight, with their daughter at her side, and their son, healthy and vibrant, proudly teaching his mother about the universe. He realized he finally had it all, not the wealth or the power he had once chased, But this was everything. Amelia looked up from the eyepiece and caught his eye. She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her emerald eyes, and in that look, he saw their future. It wasn't about reclaiming the past, but about building a new one, together on a foundation of sacrifice, forgiveness, and a love that had proven strong enough to survive it all. And there you have it, a story of love lost, devastating secrets, and a family's fight for survival against all odds. It shows us that sometimes the greatest riches aren't stored in a bank vault, but in the unbreakable bonds we share and the sacrifices we make for the people we love. Damian Sterling had to lose everything he thought he wanted to finally gain everything he truly needed. What did you think of his transformation? Could you forgive someone after a betrayal that deep, even if it was done to protect you? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a huge thumbs up. Don't forget to share it with someone who loves a story about second chances, and most importantly, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another real-life drama. Thanks for listening.